Welcome back. We ended last video with a question of what the cost of inflation might be. And this is quite interesting because there's some dynamic elements at play. Because inflation not only reduces the purchasing power of your income, so your money is less valuable, but in periods of inflation, in inflationary periods, you're also typically earning more money. So what extent do these things balance each other out, and to what extent are there additional or hidden costs associated with it? So costs of inflation include uncertainty about the future price level. When we're experiencing inflation, it might be more difficult to plan for the future, to save for the future. Costs of inflation include shoe leather costs, which are the opportunity cost of holding on to cash. What is the return you could make if you were banking? Shoe leather refers to literally wearing out your shoe leather, running to the bank and back to change money. Again, in developed economies, this might not be as problematic because we can do these things digitally. A cost of inflation might be money illusion. So, did you really receive a raise, or was it just inflation? If it is a real raise, then you should celebrate. You might be able to increase your consumption. But if it's just a change in the price level, maybe you shouldn't change anything because you'll be spending more. Costs of inflation might include menu cost. This is the fact that it costs time, money, and resources to change price lists, to literally change menus. Again, this might be less of an issue in the digital age, but it's still a concern. Inflation might redistribute wealth, and the way this wealth is redistributed might be unequal. Now, for most of us in this class who are borrowers, particularly those with student loans, inflation might be a good thing because what inflation does is transfer money from lenders to borrowers. But prices and incomes adjust at different rates at different people for the economy. In other words, we have price confusion and tax distortion. You have to pay tax on income that you earn off of interest. But that interest is reflective of the opportunity cost of holding cash. So are you paying taxes just on inflation? Again, deeper answers to these questions are beyond the scope of this class, but it's worthwhile to consider, and there are additional notes posted on Canvas for those of you who want to dive in. So we know these costs of inflation, but what's causing it? And the important quote here is, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. What this means is the money supply determines inflation, and later this week we're going to be talking about the Federal Reserve and the money supply. So not all price increases are caused by inflation, and there's plenty of reasons to change prices. A change in input costs, like we saw in last week's supply and demand lecture, change in taxes or tariffs. When the relative price of a good rises, sometimes people call it inflation, but this is not inflation. Inflation refers to an increase in the overall price level, and that's why we have to tie it to an index. We've been talking about GDP, we've been talking about inflation. Our final macroeconomic concept that we're going to talk about this unit is called unemployment. And it's defined as the number of people without a job yet still actively seeking one. We'll dive into this a little bit more in the next video. But to prime the pump a little bit, would you call my 94-year-old grandfather unemployed? Now, with unemployment, we can think of three different kinds. We can think of frictional. This is the sort of unemployment that exists due to people in the process of moving from one job to another. We sometimes call this voluntary or natural unemployment. There's structural unemployment, and this causes from shifts in the economy and changes in technology. For instance, we don't have a lot of VCR repairmen anymore. And there's cyclical unemployment. And this is the unemployment that results from economic upturns and downturns. And it's related to supply and demand, like we talked about last week. After all, there's a supply and demand of labor, of employment. So let's end this mini lecture video with a think, pair, share, a pause and think question, which is, should we strive for zero unemployment? Think about it, brainstorm on your own, and we'll close this lecture video out in the next one with maybe an answer.